Hi there and welcome to the It Factor podcast. I'm here with Calvin. It's great to have you here, Calvin. You're the VP of Data at Airtasker. And look, I've had you at the talk shows before, so it's great to see a familiar face here again. And we're here to kind of talk about your journey and how you ended up in data in the first place and then how you ended up at Airtasker. Look, I want to start with maybe your journey into leadership and technology and where this all started. Tell me, let's wind back the clock. How did you find yourself in the data space?
Thanks for having me on again, Maddie. It's really good to see you again and be on the show. I think from an early age, I've always enjoyed solving problems.
Yeah.
And specifically when I started knowing about computing and computers, I got really interested in how we can use technology to really solve the problems that we don't really want to do. The classic, I'm too lazy to do my homework. I would prefer someone else to do it for me. And as a result, I started looking at courses that are related to computing, and ultimately I landed in artificial intelligence and distributed systems. A long time before it became the thing.
Fun, exciting thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
I must admit, it was purely related to computer games at that point. But then I realized that I was really fortunate in hindsight around my timing. I started my career after the dot-com bubble. So it was at a time where organizations were really tackling technology in a mature way. Rather than just dabbling in technology, they were embracing and transforming the businesses in an enterprise-wide, organized way. And that led me to learn one of the biggest lessons of my life. And it's the reason why I chose to learn more about leadership in my career. And that is that in order to solve big problems, it's not enough just to have the will or the technical know-how. It's about bringing together diverse opinions, skill sets, and also domain knowledge to collaborate on the same outcome, to have a common goal, and then to be able to drive a group of people towards that common goal and a result. So
I love that.
So the result is the sum of the parts, or greater than the sum of the parts.
It's really interesting because the last podcast that I just recorded before was with also the CIO of Beyond Bank Australia, and she was saying a very similar thing, that you've got to have, it's not only having the technical skills, but it's having other soft skills that are really important to be able to bring the right people together, to be able to communicate and have that kind of stakeholder buy-in as well. Like, you can have all this fantastic technical knowledge, but if you can't communicate that to someone else that doesn't have the technical know-how, then you're not going to achieve anything. I think that's finding that balance, isn't it?
Yeah, the ideas need people to be the oxygen that fuels it.
And what has changed in your career when you first started in data? You were more in the data science side of things, and how has the data profession changed, do you think, from then until now?
Looking back, I think when we first started, and this is in the early 2000s, data was always about reporting the past. We can trust the past because once you make that fancy report in a table, it will never change. It was all about accuracy. It was about being able to break that down into specifics, but it was never about explaining the why. You can tell what happened, but the why was largely up to the interpretation of everyone else. I think as data became more trusted, it became a tool that could be used to explain what is happening in the current. And then now in the last 6-7 years, it's become what do we do in the future? So it's kind of transitioned from what has happened, what is happening now, and then what should I do in the future? And the trust has moved to a stage where people are using it to drive their business decisions and the strategy. So I guess it's moved from the back room to the front of the house.
Really front of house, yeah. It's seen such a transformation, I think, and people really understand the power of data now. Now, I'd love to talk a little bit about Airtasker just briefly as well. And here we've got a question that looks around what strategies you found the most effective in fostering a data-driven culture. We spoke about data-driven decision-making, but how do you drive that sort of culture at Airtasker at the moment?
I think from my experience, there are three ingredients that really make a data-driven culture succeed. First, you need to trust the data. And I think we talked about that before, because that's a foundational piece of infrastructure where if you don't trust what you're looking at, there will always be questions and doubts around what people are using. The second bit is around training and staff education. It's imperative that everyone within the organization knows what the data can do, what it's describing, and most importantly, the limitations of the data that they're looking at. What has been crucial for Airtasker and our teams who use data day in and day out is to understand where the power of data ends and where human judgment and experience comes in to augment the analytics that they're seeing. I think lastly, the third ingredient is to ensure that data is easily accessible. Like to make a decision, you should never have to wait for like a week or so for an analyst to produce that. They should be able to just grab that insight, understand it, and apply it to the day-to-day workflow.
It's such an interesting point, that last one, because I know growing up in this day and age, we want things at the touch of a button as well. We're a bit demanding, aren't we? And we expect things quite instantly, and we expect insights quite instantly as well. So having to wait a week can actually put a business back, though, if they aren't being able to make those decisions as well. I mean, looking at emerging trends in data in the industry as well, what do you find the most exciting at the moment? How do you see them impacting the industry?
There are two trends that kind of go hand in hand for me. The first one is the trend on the infrastructure side, where SaaS tools and providers are starting to share the underlying analytics warehouse in the cloud. So these are tools that no longer house a copy of your data, but rather read directly from your enterprise's central store of data. That has the effect of being able to directly stand up tooling and minimize the cost of transferring data between tooling and your main analytics warehouse. The second trend, which is similar, but on the other side, is really the rise in Gen AI enabled tools that enable two domain or knowledge sets to be stitched together. Traditionally, you would need a human for that, but now you can use Gen AI to then stitch two knowledge bases together, as opposed to two data sets in the first case. Together, these two trends have the impact of really reducing the cost of doing analysis with external data sets. Just like how cloud computing changed the way we scale our infrastructure, and these two trends in Gen AI and also in shared cloud computing resources means that we have a lower cost to analysis, a faster path to the answer, but also the second order effects include simpler data governance, not having data sprawl, and just the cost of making the cost of compliance easier.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned cloud computing and the transformative effect it's had on the industry as well, because that's really changed the game for a lot of businesses, especially looking in the startup environment as well, looking to scale quite quickly. It's a game changer. But I guess, what do you believe are the key components of an exceptional customer experience from an Airtasker perspective as well, considering what Airtasker does? How do you provide that I guess exceptional CX perspective?
I think if I take the perspective of a consumer, Calvin the consumer, a good customer experience is pretty standard. You want a tailored experience. You want it to be frictionless, and you want it to take you to the outcome that you desire as quickly as possible. You mentioned that we are a little bit impatient now. We want everything to be done quite quickly. For me, what makes an exceptional customer experience is what happens when you wander away from that happy path, when a booking doesn't go right, when a task didn't quite meet your expectations.
And that's going to happen, isn't it? It isn't inevitable. You can try so many different, I guess, methods to stop those things going wrong, but it does happen.
It does happen, and it's how your organization responds to the consumer that makes that an exceptional experience. And data has a big part to play in that, in helping provide the leading signals to go, hey, something doesn't look quite right here. Let's activate those resources so that we can help the consumer and preempt what they really want. So just like how you preempt what they want in purchasing or finding their task, it's also preempting what they would like to resolve that issue. I think for me, that's the exceptional cases are also exceptional customer experience really occurs when you handle the exceptions themselves.
Yes. And I guess being from Airtasker and having this fantastic app that you guys work with, I'd love to know, we were talking about in one of my previous podcasts as well, is that balance between that human element, but also having the use of this amazing technology like Gen AI. People can communicate with chatbots and get almost all their problems solved within the chatbot function. But when should a human step in? When should someone give them a call? Or do you find that that's still needed, or do you think the consumer these days, they're happy to just deal with a technology or a tool? Or what's your kind of thoughts on that?
I think humans always have a part to play. And the state that Gen AI is at the moment really is for the majority of the lighter load cases.
Yeah.
Like when we talked about exceptions and when things go wrong, we humans still tend to prefer a human voice on the other end of the lines, someone who can produce and display empathy and understand that problem from their shoes. So for me, I really think that humans still play that crucial role in making that human connection between your organization, your brand, and your product with the end consumer when things don't go right. Of course, the impatient side of us, of course, don't ever want to wait for someone. And of course, at 2 a.m. in the morning, you still want someone to reply, but that they still have a role to play.
Yes. I loved your point about empathy, though, as well. It's like at the moment, our chatbots don't have the ability to produce empathy. So it is important to have a human in the loop in that regard as well. But let's look at maybe some insights into approaching large-scale transformation projects as well. So you're currently working in it was a startup environment that's really scaled up. Talk us through how you approach this transformation, and so what are some of the common challenges, but also how do you overcome those challenges as well?
And first of all, I'm one of many. I stand on the shoulders of all my predecessors who have transformed the business along the way. The key challenges for any large-scale transformation is really to keep the organization's focus and commitment across multiple financial years. Technology or data or even organization transformation takes many years. It's not a single period. It's not a single year. It requires a concerted focus. The second challenge is to maintain your solution or whatever you're building, your initiatives, relevant and still up to date with both the technology trends of the time and also the needs of the organization across those years. And they're all variable. In order to tackle the very first problem, which is to keep the organizational focus and commitment, I believe it's really important to be able to deliver value on a regular basis, to break down your initiative and demonstrate that real value is being gained, whether it's in the revenue end or in the operations end. Real value is being delivered across time consistently and not just at the end of your big 3-year program.
Yes.
You deliver that.
And obviously you set goalposts, but at the end of the day, someone said to me, transformation never really ends. It's not like, oh, we've achieved this 3-year plan and that's it. Great, we could all relax, let's have a drink. It continues, doesn't it? It's just it's a never-ending goal. It's like the goalpost just keeps getting moved.
Yeah, and no plan ever survives the first contact.
Yeah.
And I think at Airtasker, our focus have really evolved over the last couple of years. We started off with what I would consider a very mature data stack, a very mature analytics stack, but as the needs of the business and the sophistication of what we do with both our operations, marketing, and our product. It needs evolve, and so do our goalposts. And the second problem is probably the adaptability, being able to design your architecture and ecosystem and also your business processes to be modular and flexible so that you can always plug and play the best in class and adapt to the changing needs to your business.
Yes. And I think it's so important, again, that adaptability piece when it comes to the changing needs of a business, but also the change in technology options as well, and the cloud solutions and the SaaS solutions available to us. I want to talk to you around maybe advice now. We're talking about leadership in this podcast usually, and you've worked up the ranks starting in consulting, and you've moved up to a point where you're now in a leadership position. I guess, firstly, what kind of lessons have you learned as a leader that maybe surprised you a little bit when you moved into a leadership position? And then what advice would you have for someone also working their way up the ranks?
What surprised me? Everything surprises
Yeah.
me. I think that is the lesson. Actually, the core lesson is that you'll never be at the top of your game. There's always someone smarter and someone better to learn off.
Yes.
And I guess that ties into my bit of advice, that to always stay curious.
Never stop learning.
Never stop learning, especially in tech where everything's evolving, and one day this is the best practice and the latest and greatest, and the next day there's a better approach, whether it's new technology or new ways of approaching old problems. There's always something new and someone to learn off. Stay curious. And secondly, to complement that, to always get your hands dirty. It's tempting to take a step back and just go, well, I've read this report. I roughly know how this works. My advice is always to give it a go. Like, get your hands dirty, because a leader who understands what the teams are facing day to day and what the tools they're using look like day to day and the experiences they're having is a leader that is much better equipped to handle the overall strategy and the incidents that have happened as a result.
And I think it's a really great point, because I've worked in many a team that the boss that's overseeing everything actually doesn't know what's happening on a day-to-day basis, which makes it hard for everyone else when they're making all the decisions. And you're going, well, have you actually used this tool before? Have you actually sat down and given it a go and gotten your hands dirty? So I love that point as well. And I want to bring it back to a point that you made around data. And we were talking about some trends, and we're obviously seeing our biggest buzzword is Gen AI. Everyone's talking about it and the possibilities in Gen AI. I mean, where do you sit on the scale of hype? Are you excited? Do you think it's overhyped? Do you think it's underhyped? Do you think we're kind of finally balancing out where we're seeing some really fantastic use cases? Where are your thoughts at this point in time?
I think I would put myself kind of squarely in the middle.
Yeah.
I think it's a very promising technology, and there's still some ways to go, and you can see the advances that are being made over the last couple of months, where Gen AI is getting to the level of quality and stability that an enterprise or like a consumer-facing product would demand. At the same time, I also know that Gen AI is not the solution to all our problems. It's one of the many tools in our toolkit that could solve a problem. One example is image recognition. There is a well-established body of work and a lot of specific algorithms that handle that. It is still cheaper to use those dedicated algorithms than to throw it to a generalized AI. Of course, as both fields advance and they all come under the umbrella of AI, that might change. But I still believe on finding the right tool for the right solution. And as of today, I don't think Gen AI is the be all end all of everything.
Yeah.
It's halfway up the hype cycle.
It's definitely not a one size fits all situation either. And there was another point you made around access to data too. And I know that people, when we talk about Gen AI, they get concerned around data privacy and what sort of data we're feeding into our models as well, and protecting this data that we have too. So, I mean, where do you see Gen AI fitting in the cybersecurity side of things as well? Is it causing more threats, or are we using it as a tool to stop our cyber criminals from accessing our data?
Oh, that's a really complicated question in that.
There's no easy answer though, is there?
Yeah, like any emerging technology is now at a stage where regulation and privacy legislation is coming in to address it, but I kind of see it in two ways. As a general consumer who don't pay for a service, and this applies to any digital platform, regardless of whether it's Gen AI or your social media, there is an expectation that you do not own your data, and as a result, you have to consider like free Gen AI services as that you do not own the data that you're putting in, and hence you have no rights to that. I'm really looking forward to advances in privacy law and consumer protections in regards to free AI services and free digital platforms as a result. But at an enterprise level, these protections can be paid for. And then you pay for that, and then it becomes a very secure, secure environment, and you can then safely use them. So it's a bit of a tale of two cities. Like, if you can pay for it as an enterprise, you can deploy these safely and use them. But as a general consumer, there's much more work to be done to ensure that the normal consumer is safe.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think the general consumer as well has that level of understanding now around their data and the privacy around their data as well? And is there need for more education with the consumer, do you think?
I think definitely. If anything, I feel that the consumer these days have this established expectation that their data is not their own. And I think a lot of the legislation that is coming in through the European markets, like GDPR, and also the new privacy reforms here in Australia, are trying to change that, to change the expectation that in order to gain access to a service, that you and your data, which is essentially the product, remains your property. I would love for consumers to have a broader awareness of like what they're using.
100%.
And the consequences of that.
Yeah, and we do often turn to the EU for guidance on what they're doing, like with policies and regulations as well. We're kind of following suit in Australia. Do you think Australia's got a fair way to go, though, when it comes to legislation around data privacy?
I think there's a current round of privacy legislation being put through, and I feel like that is the beginnings of an approach, but it could do with more. And it's really difficult to ask me what exactly I want out of that, because that very same space is changing so quickly now. I would love a GDPR scheme, but I also recognize that the costs of complying with GDPR in an Australian context is also quite difficult given our digital landscape.
Yeah, and being a multinational company now, we were talking just before about how you've got offices in the US as well, you've got offices in the UK. How do you deal with that multi-regulatory compliance piece? That's got to be tough.
I think it's the cause of some of my white hairs. The great thing about privacy legislation and consumer regulation in general is that they pursue the same principles. And if you pursue those same principles in your compliance, you're able to build something that matches the majority of the regional legislation. Of course, there are specific regional requirements. I mean, California has its own specific nuances. The UK, the EU have, while they're generally aligned, they have a little bit of eccentricities. And Australia, of course, is trying to match them. So as an organization, if you build to the core principles and you build in a way that honors the intentions of those, it becomes easier to comply with all the different regions. And then you just work through the little exceptions along the way.
Yes, but definitely no lie in saying that it does cause some grey hairs. I think you're not alone in saying that as well. And we're talking about kind of having the different offices in different regions as well. How do you approach, I guess, building diverse teams, especially in different areas? And what do you think why do you think diversity is crucial in building data-driven decision-making as well? Where do you think that plays a role?
I am a massive advocate for diversity in our teams, not just of age, gender, and all the usual things, but also in education, background, approaches, and ways of thinking. For me, diversity is critical to a high-performing team because it provides not just a broader suite of approaches and tools to creative problem solving, but it also helps us address some of the inherent biases that we have. Everyone brings a bias to the way they solve, and that comes partly through the way they're trained. Computer scientists versus a economist or a statistician, there's just inherent ways of thinking that we apply to the world. And having a diverse viewpoint helps us mitigate all of them and identify that. Part of that, is building and identifying really diverse teams. Personally, for me, I consciously ensure that my teams are complementary to each other, and there are no cookie cutter roles. There are no cookie cutter experiences and skill sets, and we bring a different viewpoint to everything. You also need to bring through mechanisms and structures that enable collaborative thought and in diverse viewpoints. And I love generative dialogue, and it's something that I can talk about for hours. But it's essentially a framework that encourages people to not win an argument, but to build upon everyone's ideas until you reach a common alignment.
I think it's fantastic when we talk about diverse teams. Communication is key, obviously, as well, and being able to collaborate. And I love bringing different perspectives together. And like you said, it actually identifies the biases that we do have. I mean, how do you empower those people to feel confident enough to speak their mind as well, especially if they might be in a room of really powerful people, but they might have a fantastic idea? What do you do there?
I mentioned generative dialogue, and maybe I'll take this opportunity to elaborate on it. It's a framework that says, essentially, everyone who enters this room parks their ego at the door. Everyone's equal around the circle. But more importantly, you only speak when you have additional ideas or information or points of view to build upon other people's ideas. You build upon that together, and then you actually embrace the awkward silence when you have nothing else to build upon. And then you end up with a framework where, hey, the CEO might be in the room, but if that idea really doesn't warrant any further development, or it has been additional information has to be built upon, and it's not worthy of being pursued, it just ends in that silence, and everyone walks away knowing that we've tackled it to its fullest extent, and then we walk away. Of course, outside of that framework, it's also being able to trust your teams and empower them to make the decisions in a free and open forum. So I actually love what used to be the motto at Macquarie Bank, which is freedom within boundaries. You set the safety barriers. You set the principles on which you want to create your problem-solving space and the powers that you can exercise, and then just go forth and solve it. And when they do need help, let's have another dialogue and then solve that.
I love the idea of coming into a room as well, a meeting room, where you kind of flatten the structure of the business and you go, there's no hierarchy here. I really like that, because that does open up a lot of dialogue as well. And just lastly, I want to kind of finish off with looking at what, I guess if you got your crystal ball out, give us some predictions for the future. Where do you see, firstly, let's look at Airtasker. What's the plans for the future? I know you couldn't reveal everything to us, can't reveal all the secrets of the business, but yeah, what's Airtasker's plans? And then where do you think the industry is going in technology-wise? It's a big question, but I'd love to see you tackle it.
I mean, let me start with the easiest answer, which is Airtasker. The plan for Airtasker is to leverage what we know, the knowledge and the playbooks that we have from our main Australian market, which has been operating for at least 12 years, and to use those principles and learnings to grow into international markets. We have a established market now in the UK, and we want to expand geographically. And the same with our foothold in LA at the moment as well. I think the company is at a scaling phase where it's all about just finding the things that work, continue to experiment with that, and then
try and test a few things.
Try again and try again.
Yeah, fantastic. And where do you see, I guess, when we're talking about AI, emerging technologies, what do you think is going to happen in the next 5 years? Do you really think that regulatory landscape is going to ramp up to understand what we can and can't do with AI?
Yes, and I think more so than ever now, as AI tools become more and more sophisticated and more accessible to the general population, it's come back into the forefront of what should be regulated and what can't be. The use of AI tooling to interfere with elections, for example, really then brings that and strikes home at the hearts of our lawmakers. In terms of our industry, it's trying to balance this constant advancement and investment in Gen AI, or even just AI capabilities in general, and trying to make that decision of buy or build. Do you invest as an organization that has its core business but would like to use AI, or do you want to just wait for someone else to provide that service as a dedicated thing for you? That is going to be like an ongoing question over the next 5 years. The other side of the coin is this mulling question of how much will Gen AI eventually cost me? We are currently in the hype cycle, and everything is free, everything is cheap. At some point, it will come back, and there will be a eventual cost to everything that we're building. I'm hoping that competition as an element will keep that pricing relatively low, but it's also like a question always at the back of my mind about how much we should build and how much we should adopt.
Yeah, it's
into our business model.
Definitely some food for thought as well, and something that we've got to keep our eye on. And I want to say a big thank you, Calvin, for joining us on the It Factor podcast. It's been fantastic having you again here today, and we're looking forward to having you join us again.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great chat.